Now let's create the PyroFX explosion. So we start by simply putting a simple fireball into the scene, pressing enter to put it right at the origin. Now it's going to think a little bit before it gets it all set up in there and puts it in its own object. So we're going to take the pyro burst source, and we're at frame 200, so this would be, the explosion would be all gone. So we need to change the start frame to 200. Go back to frame 200 and we can see, okay, the beginning of the pyro burst at this point. We can also add a single point input, so we don't want this right at the origin. We want to lift it up to 0.3 to put it in the center of the bomb. So that's where the explosion will take place, is right in the center of the bomb there. So the next thing is we click on the pyro solver, and that also has a start frame, so we make sure that that's set properly. And we're going to use the minimal OpenCL solution there, and then what you can do is something called limit source range. So it's currently it's from frame 1 to 12. What we want to do is change that from 200 to 240. So you limit that so that the simulation isn't taking up too much space in memory, so you can control exactly how much memory is being used on the GPU, because the minimal solver is a GPU version of the solver. So if we go back to frame 200 and press play, we'll start the simulation and get a feel for how things are looking. So it's a little rough right now, but it gives us a general sense of what the size of the explosion is in relation to the small pieces of the bomb. And so we probably want to make some adjustments to get these to work. The other thing we want to do is use the output here, this sort of bar to set up the look for the colors so they come across nicer. So we're going to go to the pyro source, and we're going to make some adjustments there. We're going to start by just taking the overall size and bringing it down to 0.35, the size of what we had before. We're going to change the spread angle. We can actually make it bigger, 180, so it goes all, a little bit in a bigger area. Then we're going to go down to the pyro bake volume, the pyro solver, and we're going to make some changes here. And this has to do with the bounds. We don't need the bounds to be that big. It's probably chewing up more memory than we need. So we're going to go 15, 12, 15, and we're going to put the center at 4. So it's mostly sitting under the ground like that. And we're going to change the voxel size to 0.035. So we'll get a little bit more detail in the fire sim, but because we made the box smaller, it's not going to cost us as much. And you can tinker with this. You could maybe make a smaller box and add more detail, but for now we're just going to go with these values. So now the explosion is coming out, and we're getting it to play and simulate. Now, right now there's no interaction between anything in the scene, and the little pieces of the bomb are one thing that we would like to get integrated in there, so we'll do that in a little bit. The main thing is we'll stop this, go back to frame 200, and we're going to go tab file, and we're going to go and get under Geo Bomb, we're going to get the bomb pieces. So in order to integrate them in, we're going to start by just bringing them in. We're going to put them in as collision geometry for the pyro solver here. Then we're going to do what's called a quick setup, which is a setup at SDF. So that's converting the pieces into volumes, so they'll do better collision with the pyro. And that's not a bad place to start, but we need a little bit more detail. So we need, and we need things to sort of make sense. So we need to unpack the pieces that come in using the RBD unpack, and then we need to unpack again the volume. And once we have that, then we can We can press play and we can see those chunks. So if we set the display on the VBD from polygons, we see the chunks that will, they're a little chunkier than the actual pieces, but that should help us with the integration with the Pyro. And we're going to put a peak in, which allows it to go 0.1, which just beefs those up a little bit more. So they're better chance of them integrating with the fire. And we're going to put a just vector in there. And so we're going to adjust certain, so enable post-process. So after all of this stuff has happened, we're going to have a little strength added to the scale of the volume, the velocity. So now we set the display back on the end of the chain, and we're going to press play to see that working. But before we do that, we need to go into collision here, and there's a collision range, and we can do exactly what we did before, which is a frame range. So we can say again 200 to 240, so we don't have to worry about any collision. Collision is ignored anything outside of that range. So if we press play now, you'll see that the little tendrils start to appear on the pyro explosion as the bits of the bomb that are sort of sent off start to have an effect on the look of the pyro sim. So we're already adding, sort of anchoring the effect into the scene, into the shot, using these little pieces of debris and getting them to affect the look of the sim. So. Okay, so as you can see, this is simming on the GPU. We're getting pretty decent speed, so we can get feedback, get a feel for that. As we get a little further along, we're going to want to probably cache that out, and so we can, we don't have to worry about the sim anymore. So the first thing we do is we're going to put a post-process node in here, and what this does is actually it creates efficiencies in the information that we eventually store on disk. So we're going to convert to VDB, we're going to convert to 16-bit float, and then we can do a couple other things like call volume, and this will allow the file that we save on disk to be smaller and also be more efficient, play back better. And if we do a cache simulation from this quick menu here, it sort of puts it off to the side, but we want it to go from the post process, so we want to feed a different node into that. So we're going to take the post process into there so that we get the efficiencies of that when we store these files on disk, and then we can feed that back into the Pyro look. And so we take that and we find a directory on disk that we want to store all this. So we're going to go geo/pyrosim. We don't need a version number, and for the base name, we can just give it we can just let it be what it is. So save to disk. So I'm going to go from 200 to 240. Goes and thinks, comes back. We're almost finished there. We didn't need to watch the whole sim. And there we go. So now we have something that from 200 to 240 we can just scrub through, and we're getting the efficiency of that through there. And if we set to the end of the chain, you can start to see some of the Pyro look, which it sort of mimics what the Pyro shader will do later when we render. So it gives you a feel for that if you want to make some tweaks in there. So for instance, we might want to darken some of these areas to get a richer, darker look to the Pyro sim. So we can make those adjustments, but we'll do that, most of that later when we render in the Solaris context.